I bought this cheap slider on Amazon some time ago. As you can see, it's a manual slider. Using a slider manually is a bit difficult to get a consistent move. So I decided I wanted to make it motorized. And I got this old motor from a ice making machine, I think. And I thought, well, it's a low revolution motor, so let's try to do something with that. Just to test if there is anything that I can do with it, I mounted a string to the slider, and then I mounted the other end to the motor. And the slider is moving very consistently. So there is a potential for making a motorized slider. So let's start by disassembling this plastic thing. However, the screws, as you see here, are triangular. Luckily, I have a triangular bit from a cheap screwdriver set I bought once. Getting the screws off, you can see that the motor here is just connected directly to the AC from the outlet of the wall. However, it's connected through the small switch, as you see inside. The motor is mounted with 4 screws, and that gives me some ideas on how to mount this to the slider. So the motor is a TY60A synchronous AC motor. It's powered directly from high voltage, so it's a bit dangerous to use and you need a power outlet. So now it's time to get to the workshop. I brought the switch along since I thought I might need that. It was spring loaded, so getting it out was actually quite easy. I just used the wire cutter to cut off the zip tie and the connectors for the switch. However, I regretted that later. And here I'm just trying to get the idea on how to mount it to the slider. So time to pull out the table saw. I'm using a spare piece of plywood to make this mount. First of all, I'm just cutting the end as it was a bit crooked. I tried to eyeball it on where the motor should be fixed. So measuring the width, I found the center. And measuring the shaft on the motor, I found out what size of drill I should use. So remember, when you do this, use a piece of scrapwood to put underneath to prevent blowout on the other side and prevent from drilling down into your workbench. I just realized that the motor was a bit wider where the shaft was mounted, so I used a countersink just to widen the hole on the bottom. I thought these screws would work, however I realized that the screws was a bit too long and would stick through the wood. So I decided to use the bench grinder to grind the tip off the screws, since it was only protruding a little bit. Putting in the screws worked quite nicely, and I did that for all 4 sides. Now I just have to figure out where to put the bracket itself, and I decided to go with putting it on top of the slider. I just aligned the bracket with the slider and marked where to drill. I used a camera mounting screw that came with my tripod. And once again I had to use the countersink to make it all the way through. I wasn't sure it would hold because it was only mounted by 1 screw. So I tried tightening it up a bit more. It could still move, however it seems to hold up just fine with the 1 screw. So now it's time to do the electric. I have to warn you, if you don't know anything about electrics, don't do this. This is high voltage and it's dangerous. So the motor spins and it's time to test to see if it works properly. It does work, however I realized that the slider was dragging a bit because it was mounted on the side of the sliding part. so I had to figure out a way to pull on the sliding part from the middle. I realized I had to make a quick release thing when resetting the slider. I just found a standard hook in my drawer. I tried to figure out how to mount it to the middle of the sliding part, but here in Europe we use the metric systems and we use bolts and nuts in millimeters and not in quarter inch. So a standard camera bolt is not easy to get around here. But I just realized that stretching the hook a bit and putting it on the sliding part underneath, it would not be in the way of the camera head. I also realized that I would need that switch to make it easier to stop, because if you don't stop it, it's gonna ruin the slider or the motor, or it's just gonna break the string. So I'm just measuring the diameter of the inside of the plastic cover where the switch was mounted. Luckily enough, I had a Forstner bit with the same diameter. So drilling from underneath, I was sure not to hit either the motor or the slider, and using a small drill I could drill through and then drill from the other side to prevent blowout. So mounting the switch was a problem. I had to account for the spring loading mechanism. So I just took a file to make a slice in each side. And here my camera died, so now I'm just using the camera in my phone looking top down. This is where I realized I should not have cut off the wires, because I could have used these for the switch. But using multi-tool I was able to cut down the pins so they fit right into the connector. So basically the bracket is done. I just need to make a small box to contain the motor and the electrical. So now it's time to test it out. I put the camera on the slider and tried to make some sliding shots of my table saw. And here's the result. Here's how it looks, how smooth the sliding part is. I realized that putting the slider on the 45-degree angle on my tripod, I could get a shot like this. I realized that putting a string on the handle of the tripod head, I could get a movement like this. And furthermore, the slider has the same mounting holes on each side. I could just take the bracket off, mount it to the other side, and the camera could go in the other direction. I tried some other ideas where you could rotate the tripod head, however you need a firm place to put the hook, otherwise it's not going to be consistent. So here's an example of what you can achieve with this kind of thing. A thing I would say about this project is that do not use an AC motor, because you need a power outlet and you can't really change the direction on this kind of motor. So this was just a proof of concept and it seemed to be successful. So I'm going to buy a geared DC motor that can run on battery. This way it's not as dangerous and you can transport it and use it without a power outlet. And with the DC motor you can change the polarity and that way reverse the camera without removing the bracket. Thank you for watching.